welcome everyone. My name's Leah Park-Hill-Riley. I'm practice leader for coaching here at the Roundtable, also a coach myself, and really excited for the conversation today about accelerating team focus and flow, how to thrive amid change and uncertainty. A lot in that title and a lot in the content for today. And so we've got with us, obviously, Glain Roberts-McCabe, who is founder here at the Roundtable, and as well, the esteemed Dr. Liane Davey, esteemed, delightful, so many superlatives I could add, but a wonderful partner that we're so excited to welcome to the webinar. So let me move along and then allow our friends to do the chatting. So just before we go into the webinar content, something that we talk about all the time here is about our commitment to making an impact. And so as part of our commitment to ongoing reconciliation, we've partnered with a charity known as Inspire. It's a national Indigenous registered charity that invests in education of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples for the long-term benefit of their communities, families, and Canada. And it's to honor the legacy of Kamloops 215. So in honor of that, we are looking to raise money for 215 scholarships in partnership with Inspire. If you are interested in learning more, there's information on the screen. But I'd just like to take a moment to now respectfully acknowledge that I'm situated in Toronto, and it is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat people. Toronto is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people, and I encourage you to also acknowledge the territory and lands on which you reside currently. All right, so just a few housekeeping notes. Don't worry, your lines are muted, your cameras are off, but the lines are live. So please feel free to add questions into the Q&A or points into the chat. Pretty good about monitoring those. Glain will keep an eye on it throughout the call. And so for those who don't know us at the Roundtable, our focus is really around unleashing collective impact. And so often we get calls from individuals about leadership development or training, and we know that that's kind of just the surface of the conversation. And we really look at how can we dig deeper and unleash impact in terms of leaders, teams, and culture. And so we've developed systems and flexible frameworks in order to tap into that and really unleash something bigger than that surface discussion. So for today, the frameworks that we're really going to be talking about are related to team coaching, but we also focus on group coaching and one-to-one. Our conversation today is actually a bit of a new series that we're working on, and it is focused on devoted toward talent leaders and OD professionals. So for those of you who are on the call who are also line leaders or Roundtable alumni, don't worry, there's going to be a lot of really good nuggets for you to take away, but practical takeaways for both. And so I'm going to just do a quick intro of Glain, who will be leading the call. Glain is the founder and senior leader, president, all of those good things at the Roundtable, executive coach, 30 years of experience. Glain, do you want me to keep going? No.
No, I do.
Okay.
Thanks, Leah.
I will pass the microphone over to you and allow you to welcome Liane.
Yeah, so I'm thrilled to be here, everybody, and I'm also super excited. This is kind of a formal announcement of a exciting new partnership that we have with Liane. Liane and I have known each other for many years, and I have always admired Liane from afar, even before we knew each other, because she's been such a thought leader in the space of teams and team coaching and teamwork and team development and team conflict. I could go on, everything team. Canada's team doctor. And so, Liane has a very thriving practice, but she's one person with her partner husband. And so we've partnered with Liane to bring her content into our team initiatives. So we are now going to be officially powered by Liane Davey and 3 Co's for a lot of the work that we're doing. We're super excited about that. So in today's conversation, we're going to really be diving into a lot of things that Liane lives and breathes every day. And then at the back end, I'll chat with you about some of the ways that you can learn more and get a sample of some of these tools and start to play with them yourselves in your own practices with teams. So Liane, super, super excited to have you here. Yay,
I'm
yay.
super excited to be here. This is going to be such an amazing partnership. So I'm
Yes,
very,
I'm really pumped. I mean, we've been using as, we've kind of soft launched this for the last few months and just are really finding that, the breakthroughs that teams are having is just powerful. So love the tools and what we love at the table is practicality. So that's what we're going to get into today is we're going to be
yes.
practical things that people can apply. So folks, I know Leah said this, throw your questions in the chat. Like I actually get to talk to Liane quite a bit. So, I've got some questions for her to get the juices flowing, but the roundtable, I feel like we got to be moving something off your desk, not my desk. So you've got something that you're struggling with around teams, please throw it in there and I'll be monitoring it and we'll be bringing it into the conversation as we go along. But I thought I'd get us going. I mean, what we talked about when you and I spoke about doing this session was just this idea that there's so much overwhelm going on right now. And I think, and it's really being exacerbated by what's going on in the world, I think, as well. Like we're in almost like a perfect storm of shifting priorities and uncertainty. And I think where I'd love to start is just with all of that that's happening, what are some really kind of key steps that you'd encourage leaders and those on talent teams that are supporting leaders and teams to take to kind of create a sense of stability and focus when it's really hard to do that right now?
Yeah, I think the focus one is the big thing. So there is so much going on in our world. So I think as leaders, we're facing three things. One, everybody is distracted. So new data suggests the average employee only can go 11 minutes without being interrupted.
Oh,
And they,
wow.
isn't that scary? And they only return to the original task 25 minutes later, which means even their interruption was interrupted. So we've got major distraction problems. But at the same time, people are triggered. So the emotional dysregulation, because of everything that's going on in the world, because COVID and working remotely kind of knocked out some of our social interactions and left us with real social anxiety, but also because there are wars in the world, polarization everywhere. So you're facing a bunch of people who are triggered. And then third, we're burned out. We're
Yeah.
not sleeping well. We're not, fueling our bodies, all those sorts of things. So, each of those things amplifies the others.
Yeah.
So that's what's really terrifying. So one of the things that, as Craig and I are working on a new book about this, when your energy gets depleted, the first thing that gets knocked out is your ability to calibrate what should I pay attention to and what should I not. So as a leader, helping with that, helping with what do I pay attention to? What is important? So there's a lot of ways you can do that. I would say the first thing is I want you to think about the difference between activity, output, and outcomes.
Mm.
Activity is just what are people doing? Go into a meeting, responding to emails, researching things on the web, talking to customers. That's different from what are they actually producing? What did they get done? What did they ship, right? Which is different yet from, okay, and what change was created in the world? Did we shift our customers to our higher margin products? Did we, if we work in HR and OD, are managers giving feedback more frequently? And the problem with outcomes is that the individual doesn't control them. And so when we get really burdened and we feel like, like we don't want to pay attention to outcomes, we just want to like do stuff. So as a leader, I think the first thing I want you to think about is if I, as a leader, pay attention to my team's activity, I'm going to get busy people. If I pay attention to their output, I'm going to get productive people. But if I pay attention to their outcomes, I'm going to get effective people. And only when we pay attention to outcomes can we figure out which of those outputs aren't doing anything worth doing. They
Mm-hmm.
may be producing a bunch of stuff. Is anybody reading it?
Yeah.
It's like they may be shipping that report off to head office every single month. Is anything different because of that report? And only when we understand which outputs are driving outcomes can we then say, maybe all these activities we don't need to do anymore. So I think
Yeah.
the first thing we need to do to just bring the waterline down just a little
Yeah.
bit is get back to what are like the two outcomes that our team has to deliver? What are the key outputs that are driving that? What are the activities that are making the difference? And then what's the like 40% of stuff we can just like,
Yeah.
yeah, so
Yeah. Yeah.
huge. So just as a
I,
starting point, that's where I would start.
yeah, no, I love that. And I love the differentiation between those three things. I mean, you're in your experience
Yeah.
working with the teams that you work with, and I know you spend most of your time with executive teams. So you're
Yeah.
at the top of the house a
Yeah.
lot. Are executive teams good at this? Like, are they nailing their outcomes all the time?
She checks the lists for clients. Who's on here? No,
Yeah.
no, executive teams are almost the worst in some ways because what's so interesting about executive teams is that most executive teams aren't actually teams.
Mm,
So here's another concept that's part of the work and the intellectual property that's now part of the roundtable is we differentiate between teams and communities. So a
mm,
team has to have a shared goal. That's a pretty low bar,
yeah.
but also has to be highly interdependent. And most executive teams that we work with are struggling to find their interdependence. They kind of come
Mm,
in, they meet, they talk about each of their portfolios and their things,
yeah.
and then they leave.
Yeah.
And that's not a team.
Yeah.
That's a community.
Yeah.
And so some leadership teams, so some people on the call may actually be part of something that should rightfully be a community because sometimes we try and push team in a place where it doesn't belong. So for
Mm,
example, you may be leading a team of HR business partners. And that is actually not a team for the most part. You're not interdependent on one another.
mm,
But a great group of HR business partners should be an amazing community. So I think about it metaphorically, like there's a big difference. A team is when you all live in the same house. So in COVID, we live in this tiny house. We had both kids home, and we were trying to live four of us in this house sharing a bathroom. Right? There's a lot of coordination and interdependence that has to happen when four people are trying to work and do school. And my office is in the kitchen. You can't tell because of this nice spandex wall that's behind me, but that's the kitchen. So if somebody wanted a coffee and I was doing a webinar, right? So that's a team. There's a high level of interdependence. But now think about your neighbor. So we live in Toronto in a small little house with a shared driveway. So that neighbor is important and we have to make sure we're coordinated and they're not in their cleaning lady parks in the driveway and we can't get out sometimes and but it's a very different thing. So I think another thing I want leaders to think about is, do I lead a team?
mm,
Does this need to be a team? Are we interdependent? And are we spending our meeting time on co-creating and making hard trade-offs and having the productive conflict we need to deal with those sort of interdependent things? Or do I really lead a community? And if so, I don't need trust to be as high. I don't need communication to be as frequent. I don't need collaboration to be as intensive. I need something different. So it's another concept that I think is really important for leaders to think about right now. And in a world where we're overwhelmed, I think not trying to make everything a team would really help. I don't need to monitor everything. I don't need to be acting like we all live in the same house because we're a community and that's great. And I can see the neighbors when I need to borrow a cup of sugar, but I don't need to be like in there all the time. So that's another key concept that I really want leaders to think about, team versus community.
yeah, I think this is such an important one. And I probably want to circle back on this because I see this too all the time, right? And you see people like when we're doing team coaching activities with people, and they're including these peripheral people because they want them to feel included. And I think, I watch them in the meeting, they contribute nothing, but they're sitting in this 3 hour meeting or 4 hour meeting. And for me as an entrepreneur, and I sort of joke with the CEOs and senior executives that I work with, as an entrepreneur, when I'm in a team meeting with my team, I visualize it's like maybe a Bugs Bunny cartoon where I actually have a dollar amount on each of their heads. And I think, what is this costing me right now for us to all be sitting here? So
Yeah.
poorly run meeting for me, I am very aware of the dollars that are being spent that should be being spent with our clients, doing client work and helping our clients, right? And yet I think in organizations, we're a bit detached from that.
Yeah.
And so, it almost becomes like a default way to keep people in the loop, so to speak,
Yeah.
or avoid having maybe a hard conversation, right? To say, you know what, you don't really need to be here. It's
Yeah,
okay.
and I just did this last week. So one of the executive teams I was working with, I was talking with the CEO about, okay, what do you really need right now? They had a 3 hour chunk for a really meaty once a month meeting. Great, precious. Don't lose that.
Yeah.
But he said, what we really need is to have a conversation about the product, like a very technical conversation. And they have a 13-person executive team, and there were 5 people they really needed in that conversation. I said,
Yes.
let's try something different.
Mhm.
Let's take the 5 and say, you're just going to meet with them. But there's another big thing going on right now where they're changing their demand generation. I'm like, there are 4 people who could really benefit from using that time to go deep on the demand generation. Let's actually cleave the executive meeting in 2. Let's have 5 in one, 4 in the other, and 4 people where you're like, you know what? Go do some deep work that's
Mm.
important to you. And he had to say to them, you know, I expect you not to be doing email during this. This is 3 hours where we work on our business every month. My expectation is that you'll be on your own, but you will be working on the business, not in the business.
Yeah.
And like, it's such a radical thing. Like when I suggest like, splitting an executive meeting in 2, it's like, oh, yeah,
Yeah.
we could do that. I'm like, yes,
I know.
let's just
And
don't
as
do
long
things
as
like
people
that.
can get over the fear of status and ego, well, does this mean I'm not on the executive team anymore, right? Like, so you start to see these triggers to your point of being triggered earlier, right? Like, there's also all these emotional triggers around
Triggers.
inclusion and status and collaboration, and those things that we have to, I always love Jim Collins and the book Good to Great, and he has that phrase, confront the brutal facts. We have to confront brutal facts in
Oh
our
yeah, we're
team.
not doing that right now.
No,
There
we're
are
not.
so many brutal facts right
Yeah.
in front of our noses that we're trying to not
Yeah.
look.
So I want to kind of circle back on this thing of like when you said, no, executive teams are not great at, like nailing the outcomes. And I feel for executive teams, right? Because I think that, it is really difficult right now. Like I've got clients who are dealing with tariffs, right? As just one small example. And because we've got a trade partner who is all over the place and completely unpredictable, they are trying to figure out how they're going to get their business through this. So they, through no fault of their own, don't have a lot of clear clarity. But then
Mhm.
when we start them moving, like in our group programs, we're mostly in the middle of the organization. We often work with teams that are, heads of marketing and their management team, people like that. You really see sort of the spin effect. And I think, if folks here, I'm sure probably they're in the middle of the organization trying to support teams that are at the mercy of the spin that's going on up there. But I like being empowered. Like I don't like sort of this notion of, oh, our executive team, like this pointing up blame for me.
Mhm.
It's like control your own controllables. So what would you suggest for people that may find that their company right now is in a lot of organizational spin because they're trying
Yeah.
to address, and it doesn't, tariffs is one example, but this could happen in any industry, anytime. Pandemic was kind of an example of that, where we got into organizational spin, didn't know the way forward.
Yeah.
So what can a line leader do? What can OD people who are supporting these line leaders do to kind of create a bit of a bubble and get their team more focused or stay
Yeah.
focused?
So I think it's all about creating alignment on the team, right? So
Yeah,
it's
love that.
about, okay, so what's happening in the environment? What do we know? What does that mean for some of the big questions for our organization?
Mhm.
And then the most important question you can answer is, what's the unique value our team needs to provide in this context, right? What is the most, so we go back to outcomes, right? What are the most important outcomes? So it may be that your most important outcome becomes, we need to identify 3 potential new markets that are not US markets, right? All right. And or maybe we're in marketing, right? And we need to look at our whole funnel right now is focused on North American markets, how do we start understanding how to open up the funnel more broadly if you're in marketing? So it's really going back to, in this world, what is the organization counting on us for? The most important outcomes. And then what do we need to do to protect that? I think secondarily, if we're fearing that this is going to have huge economic repercussions, including even recession here, the other thing every line leader is obliged to do is kind of put their investments in order and understand if we need to spend less money. Here's the first thing that's going to go. Here's the second. Here's the third. Understanding what are some of the leading indicators of, if we see this, that's when we move to cut number one. If we see that, or so, what are the thresholds? So it's really first understanding very clearly these are the outcomes that our organization needs us to deliver. And then secondly, when we look at the outputs and the activities that drive those things, how do we get them prioritized in order and ready to start reducing investment if that's where we need to go? You should always have that in case of emergency break glass plan. And
Mm,
once you have that, and I don't think there's anything wrong with sharing that with your team, then they understand and they have the motivation of, look, these are all the things that we are going to stop doing before we do any layoffs or before anyone's role is touched or things like that. Okay, and guys, help me get other creative ideas about more things to insert in that list above, more drastic action. So
mm,
and I think so many people just sit there going, well, we'll see.
right.
And they don't, I'm like, if a hurricane's coming, fill the bathtub, get some water, buy batteries. What are you doing?
Yeah.
So yeah, we need a lot more of that clarity and just focus and being clear on what's the crap that so there is so much bloat in
Yeah.
our work at the moment, just that plaque that builds up in your arteries and in your work of just, some board member 2 years ago said the most lethal thing a board member can say, I wonder. And all of a sudden, you're the one who has to create this report that takes 4 hours and three different systems. You've been sending that report for 2 years, and then some other board member wondered something else. And so this report now like takes you 8 hours. Go back and say, I just want to check in. Are these data still useful? What's the 20% of information in here that leads to 80% of the changes in direction? Is there anything we can cut out of this? Could we change the frequency of it to once a quarter? Like we just don't we think that the workload is overwhelming and so little of it is actual meaningful things contributing to outcomes. So it's another thing. Just get back to what is creating value
Yes.
and how do we focus in on this? Because when people do work that's creating value, it lifts them, it buoys them.
Yeah.
They'll have the energy to get through these really rough times. If they're feeling like the stock is going like this and everything and their job is on the line and they're doing stuff that they're like, why am I doing this?
Yeah.
It's so demoralizing.
You know what? I think, yeah. And, so many thoughts going through my head. The first reaction I have is, yeah, and leaders don't step out of the business. Like this idea of working on the business, not in the business. A lot of leaders are in that activities outputs zone, right? So if we're leading from there, how are we stepping back and doing outcomes, right? How are we clear on the outcomes? And what came to mind for me, and I'd love, you to kind of share some strategies with the group on this. So here's the thing though that I see is that I'll see leaders that I don't know that they actually know what their outcomes are that their team is meant to deliver, and they don't know how to have that conversation with their manager, right? They don't know how to go to their boss because their boss may not be clear and their boss's boss may not be clear.
Yes.
So what do you do in that situation?
Yeah, so I think the best you can do is just ask in a very simple way. So, as things are very uncertain, I'm really trying to focus on the most critical investment of my team's time. And I would love your thoughts. Like, what needs to be done? And the main way your boss will answer is by what are they measured on? Right?
Right.
Ask your boss what they're measured on. That's the closest you'll get, right?
Yeah.
So I would love your help to really think through, my my take is that, these are the two most important things that I need to be focused on. How do those land with you? What do you think? And if you get the uncertainty from your boss, I
Mhm.
think just ask the question, you know, how do we get more certainty, right? Who do you think we could talk to and make it a we? Um, but if you don't have that clarity, yeah, you are just pushing paper, doing emails, showing up to meetings and adding no value. That's when you're vulnerable
Yeah,
because
yeah,
people understand that that's what you're doing, right?
yeah.
So it's super important to make sure you can get answers to those questions and keep asking until you get them. And
Mm,
again, I would also say that if you don't get them, then you choose and do those until you hear differently, right? So if
right.
if your boss isn't answering, say, okay, so I believe that these are the two most important things. So I'm going to build my plan around that. I'm going to rally everyone around that. If um in the course of business you realize there's something else that's more important or some other value, let's talk again and we can recast. But if they can't help you, pick for yourself, take the initiative. But your team deserves, even if you have to be the shock absorber in the system, your team deserves to have that clarity. So if
Yeah.
you have to create it, okay.
And I love that. I think the key piece there too is that if you're not getting from your boss, then go back to your boss with those, here's my one or two clear directions, get that alignment. You can always pivot later, but at least, because often what I'll see people do is they'll just go off and make the decision and be uninformed,
Yeah,
not have the clarity. Because sometimes when you put something in front of somebody, you're going to get a reaction one way or the other.
exactly. Then you'll know,
Then you'll know.
right?
So the big word, and I know, what we're excited about in working with you is you've got so many great tools around the big A word, accountability. Accountability. This is, if I always think like every year there's a buzzword, right? Triggers was a big buzzword a few years ago. Trigger, trigger, trigger. Oh my gosh, this year, if I had one big word that I keep hearing over and over and over again, we need people to take accountability. And coupled with that is leaders who are too far in the weeds. So, talk to us a bit about when leaders are complaining that they're way too in the weeds. What's that all about? And what do we need to think about if we're feeling like our teams are not being quote unquote accountable enough?
That's such an irony of the teams I see is for the most part, it's the leaders who are obsessed with accountability who have the least accountable teams. And
Mm.
it's because they're trying to force accountability. And when they try and force accountability, they usually rescue people by getting in the weeds. It's like,
What does forcing accountability look like when you say that? What do you mean force accountability?
it's like micromanaging. Like, have you
Right,
done it yet? Have you done it yet? Have you done it yet? And
right,
like, it's like, how are you doing that? Have you thought about this? Have you done
right,
that? And it's
right.
like, okay, so let's just understand that that is the opposite of accountability.
Yeah.
So there's two forcing accountability mistakes that leaders are making. So one is they think that they're creating accountability but instead of positioning people to succeed, they're just waiting for people to fail. And these are the people who think
Mm.
accountability is about feedback and consequences.
Hmm.
So, like, I just let you go. And then at some point, I'm like, that's not what I wanted. That's not right. And I'm giving you a crappy rating, or I'm pulling you off this account, or
Right.
that's right. So, what they think they're doing is creating account. Well, I have to hold them accountable. Like, no, all you're doing is creating fear. And fear is very, very, very orthogonal to accountability.
Mm.
And if you've created fear, you're going to have to micromanage. You're going to have to keep feeding the person. They're only going to do things when you're like right on top of them. And at some point, they get learned helplessness and they give up. So
Yeah.
that's not
Yeah.
working. But the other half of the managers are they believe so profoundly in accountability and they feel their own accountability so strongly that they can't let any balls drop. And
Right.
if no ball ever drops, then everybody else learns that they don't have to be accountable because you will be. You'll be up till midnight fixing the thing. You'll grab hold of it. And that doesn't produce accountability either. So, if your kid keeps forgetting their lunch and you keep leaving work to drive it to them, they're going to keep forgetting their lunch. So both of those problems are happening. And so what we want and what our work together is about is positioning people to succeed instead of setting them up to fail. And it's about how do we have this proactive accountability, which is much more focused on setting clear expectations, which we don't do a good job of. So, that's the other thing. Accountability, I don't think people understand two key things about accountability. First of all, accountability is internal to the person. So you cannot make them accountable any more than you can make them engaged or make them trust, right? That's not a thing. And when you try and force it, it doesn't work, right? But the other thing is accountability for outcomes. This is why we do this outcome work, because it's not just you could be responsible for an output, but accountability is, this is the change you need to create in the world. And you don't control that, but that's what accountability is. So we really need to understand what it is and leave people the space to say, okay, I'm going to define the outcome, but get out of their way and let them define the activities and how they're going to achieve that. That's when they start to take accountability. If you're right in there, in the weeds, telling them, dictating the activities, micromanaging, the minute you step back, it all falls apart because they never made any of the connections. They never understood or had insight. So we're getting
I love that because
so wrong.
To jump in on that though, because I hear the words accountability and responsibility used interchangeably.
Yeah.
And I think the way you've just broken that down, really connecting the dots to accountability is when you are owning those outcomes, right? You are feeling that sense of responsibility for your
ownership.
accountability to own the outcomes.
Yeah.
But within the outputs, there could be a number of responsibilities. Some are yours to get to the outcome. Some might be in other departments or in other teams. But and I think you're so right. And I think what you make me think of, in our work, so much of it is around starting with this idea of leaders needing to understand themselves first in order to be able to lead a team effectively, right? Leadership is an inside out job. And I think that, what we see and through the research that we've done with our partner is that as leaders, we lean one way or we lean the other. And most leaders lean towards either being very results driven or very relationship driven. Most struggle with both. And yet that's what we're talking about here. As leaders, we need to be able to balance both. You can't come in like that feedback consequences person and ignore the other side, which is how are you building up people? How are you using their strengths? How are you creating those conditions and being clear? You're not rescuing them, but you're allowing them to grow and thrive and develop, right? On that other side.
Yeah, it's so important. And you can't have one and not the other.
Yeah.
So we need to foster accountability for sure, but without eroding empathy. And that's the environment. That's a modern work environment. That's a long-term, productive, effective work environment. And so we just need leaders to understand that. And I know you guys use the LEA tool. And, one of the reasons I love the LEA tool is it just helps you understand which levers do you pull as a leader and which ones are you neglecting. And how do you become more aware of that and understand that you probably need to use some different levers sometimes, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And I think too, to circle this back, like in terms of this expectation setting being so critical, right? Like, I think you have a great phrase, like, how can people live up to expectations that you don't even know you have of them? And this
The
is
Valentine's Day effect. Yes. Getting mad at someone for not living up to an expectation you never communicated. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. You're giving me a flashback of Mother's Day.
Yeah. Mother's Day is a good one.
2009 or something where there was no present. And I went, excuse me. And my husband said, I didn't think that mattered to you. I'm like,
yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But leaders do that all the time.
All the time. But
all the time.
Oh my God, I do it every day. The members of my team are in here. And okay, so stay out of the chat roundtable team. And here's the thing, right? So this is where I give leaders a break, but this is why you got to be working on yourself all the time as a leader. You can't do a one event and done and you think you're a great leader. Yeah. The thing about I have learned into my core is that what is quote unquote common sense for you is not common sense for everybody else. So, and especially if you have a certain way of thinking and style and approach that is so natural to you, that's actually the stuff that you better be spelling out for people
Right.
on your team really clearly, and
For
don't make
sure.
assumptions. But it's almost like breathing, right? Like it's really hard for us as leaders to recognize that, oh, that's something I have to be explicit about. That feels really directive. I don't feel comfortable being that explicit on that. It's like, yeah, but
Well, that's
you
a
have a
great
way of
point.
working.
People ask me that all the time. They're like, well, isn't this micromanaging or whatever? I'm like, no, if
Right.
you're super clear about outcomes, then you can get out of the way and leave them the autonomy to figure out, all right, what are the outputs that'll lead to that? What are the
Yes.
activities that are the most important? The best leaders are super clear about outcomes because that's your job,
Yeah.
right? It's not disempowering to be defining the necessary outcomes, right?
Yeah.
But and I see leaders who so if we take responsibility as one level, then
Yeah.
accountability is a notch higher. I think the only other notch higher than that is initiative. And some,
Right.
yeah, some leaders, I had a leader at one of the big banks recently. She was very frustrated with her team because they don't take accountability. And so I got in there and I started like looking
Yeah.
under the rocks, and it was like, oh no, they take accountability. What you're upset about is they don't take initiative because they need you to clarify for them what the outcomes are. And until you do, they carry on.
Mm-hmm.
But once you do, they grab the accountability for that. Like it's excellent. But what she was realizing is that she didn't have the bandwidth to define all the outcomes. She needed them to take initiative. So, as a leader, understanding what am I expecting? Am I expecting them to take responsibility, which is control the things they can control? Am I expecting them to take accountability, which is, well, I know you can't control it, but go influence it and go figure it out? Or am I taking expecting initiative, which is like, I don't even know what it is. You go define the outcomes, you figure out the outputs, you deliver. And so as we understand, and probably there's a situational leadership piece to that about who's ready for responsibility versus
100%. I think
yeah,
situational leadership, I use that tool so often
yeah,
with leaders to say
exactly.
most people are uncomfortable being directive and setting the foundation from the beginning. It's a lever we have to pull, right, as managers and leaders in
Yeah.
organizations. So I love Susan's comment about a friend being mad because her husband didn't plan a
Susan,
surprise
isn't it
party.
true?
Oh
It's
my gosh.
so
I've never had
true.
a surprise party, and I never will because I haven't told my husband I'd like one. But anyway,
Right. It's so
Okay,
true.
so folks, questions for Liane, start throwing them in the chat. We have another 15 minutes with her. So if you've got some specific things you'd like to know about, let's do it. I want to kind of switch gears a little bit because I think one of the things that really, I've learned from doing the work with you and all of our conversations, I find like often when we get called about team stuff, it's always around team dynamics, right? Team dynamics, team dynamics. And yet, this alignment work that we're talking about, clarifying expectations, understanding what good work looks like, making sure we're aligned. Are we even a team to begin with, right? What are we doing here? What's the goal? All of that stuff will eliminate a lot of the conflict stuff that teams find themselves in. But you kind of coined this phrase about conflict debt.
Yeah.
And I'd love you to kind of talk to us a little bit about that. And then how's that potentially contributing to, uncertainty and, what should we be doing as leaders to kind of make sure we're clearing out all of this conflict debt?
Yeah. So probably even as you say it, people know what it means, right? It's like all of those hard conversations you need to have to get to the other side that you are avoiding, right? It's like, I really need to pay off that credit card bill, but I can't afford it. So I pay the interest, I pay the penalties, and it's getting heavier and heavier. That debt is costing me more and more. It's exactly the same in relationships at work. There are so many conflicts that we need to get to the other side of. It's funny when I wrote The Good Fight and I walk into a keynote or something and I start my speech with like, so here's the thing, you need more conflict. Everybody looks at me like, are you kidding me? Like there is so much conflict. I'm like, no, there's very little conflict. There's a lot of grievance. And
Right.
grievance is static. Grievance is a thing, it's a place, it's a noun, it's where I sit and stay and stew. conflict is a verb. Conflict is moving beyond, moving through, getting to the other side of. So conflict debt is kind of when you're stuck in grievance and you're not doing anything to move through and beyond this. So conflict, the definition, is just the struggle between incompatible and opposing needs, wishes, or demands. And every leader has 100 of those every day. So you choose, am I creating the forum and the conversation and the safe space to have the struggle between incompatible and opposing needs, wishes, and demands to make a decision and a trade-off to optimize? Or am I in conflict debt? Just sitting knowing that that decision really needs to be made, but my business is suffering, my team dynamic is suffering, my own mental health is suffering because I'm just sitting in this resentment and grievance. So what we do with teams is we help them understand all conflict is uncomfortable. So we shouldn't use is this uncomfortable as the litmus test of should I do it or not?
Mm,
But it's what kind of discomfort. So what we
mm,
want is more of the healthy kind of conflict, which is tension, right?
right.
Like, oh, you're stretching me to think about this in a different way and a different perspective. And wow, that stakeholder is kind of different than mine. And so healthy conflict hurts. It hurts a lot, but it hurts like yoga. It hurts like,
Mm,
oh my God, does my foot go there? Like,
yeah,
is that possible? Unhealthy conflict is friction. We're
right.
not listening to each other. We're not moving. There's no movement in it. It's just like wearing us down, slowing us down like a blister.
Yeah.
So the work we do is to help teams define what are the tensions that are supposed to be in this room.
Mm,
How are we obliged to disagree with one another, to represent our roles differently, our expertise, to pay attention to different things, to represent different stakeholders who aren't in the room?
mhm,
So, the exercise we do with that, we call it the TARP exercise, because teamwork shouldn't feel like rowing. And everybody uses rowing metaphors. We're all in the same boat. Don't rock the boat. Pull in the same direction. It's like, no, and take down those horrible posters of rowers because it gives the wrong impression. So we use this silly metaphor from when we took our kids camping years and years ago, and we were trying to spread out this blue plastic tarp because it was raining, and we're trying to protect the tent and keep everybody dry. And that's more like what a team is like. The tarp is never big enough to cover everything. The rain is coming from a crazy angle, and each of you are pulling in different directions to try and get the right decision, that right placement that keeps you all dry at night. So we do an exercise to say, all right, you're the VP commercial. What rope are you pulling on? You're the head of operations. You're the head of marketing. How do we understand that we are supposed to be in tension with one another? I always say, if sales and operations are not having productive conflict, sell your shares because
mm,
this is not a company that's really ambitious or trying to do great things. If sales and ops are getting along, not putting tension on one another, and especially, I know you do a lot of work in consumer packaged goods, right? CPG, sales and ops, whew, it should be
yeah.
right. So, getting to that work and helping the team define what are the conflicts we need to have? How do we make sure we're not in conflict at? And it's so fascinating because once you outline these and once everyone's clear what rope they're pulling on, they realize a lot of what they were experiencing as friction or a team dynamic issue was just, no, that's the tension that's supposed to be here. So you normalize it, kind of
Mhm.
neutralize the effect it has. So that work, it's a great team session where we map that out. So amazing.
Yeah,
And
we just
people,
did that with a group a couple of weeks ago.
oh, yay.
It was eye-opening for them. I mean,
I
within
know.
their own
So
team, but
great.
also looking at the cross-functional teams that they have different conflicts, air quotes with. Yeah, no, it's a huge, and I love, and I think you're right. I mean, that's the analogy that really makes most sense, right?
Right.
Happy to say when I was headed up sales, I was constantly fighting with the finance team. So
Yes.
must have been doing something right, and my ops team.
Exactly.
There you go.
Exactly. Right. And I always say some things are worth fighting for.
100%. Like
Yeah.
you get to a better outcome. I think it's tricky though, like what I see happen a lot. I just had a conversation yesterday with somebody who um executive team, and there's one person on the team that people don't trust, isn't
Yeah.
seeing delivering result. And so what would you say? Like, I mean, some of this work you can do in teams, but are there some things that you would say to folks on this call who are maybe trying to support a team internally? Like, are there some things you need to clear out of the way before you can start having some of these conversations? Like, what would you say
Yeah,
about
this
that?
is not a reality show that's an intervention for one person with everybody as like Confederates ready to turn them in. Like,
Mm,
no, that is, and I have had prospects, kind of try and get us to do that.
mhm.
And every time I'm like, no, no, because that's completely psychologically unsafe for the person who
Yeah,
is the issue, right? Oh, you're all going to like get together and ambush me, and right.
yeah.
Um, and of course, what you find is that when you get in there, it's not just the one person.
Mhm,
So it's how people choose to respond to that person is allowing them to continue to behave that way.
mhm,
So, Barbara Colaroso's work on bullying, I adopted years ago. So
mhm,
she talks about how bullying is a social dynamic that takes a bully, the bullied, and the bystander.
mm,
And the bystander is a absolutely integral part of bullying, because the bully is not strong, they're weak. And what
yeah,
they're trying to do with this is trying to earn respect of the bystander. That's who it's about. So I took that to say in teams, there's wicked behavior, there's wounded behavior, and there's witness behavior. And we
mm,
talk so much about the wicked behavior, but my experience is more often than not, the person who has to leave the team is the person who's behaving as the wounded person. Once you get into that victim mindset, it's very difficult. I can turn around somebody who's behaving wickedly and have many times in my career. I struggle. I've had a very poor track record in trying to turn around someone who's decided that they're the victim.
mhm.
But in all of it, you're like, okay, witnesses, what are you doing? And
Right.
you notice that when the conflict comes up, they just start looking at their phones or checking their email, or they kind of mind their own business. And, teams are a dynamic. So, to your question, yes, if there is one person with bad behavior who has not had feedback, consequences, instructions about what needs to look differently, don't try and do that in a team intervention. But I guarantee you that not everything can be pinned on that one person. And if I'm pulling it into a team intervention, you better believe you're all going to be learning about ways you've been enabling that behavior,
Yes.
either as the wounded person or the witness. So,
Yes.
yeah,
I think there's a responsibility as the team leader. You've got to take some courage, right? And deal with some of these issues just as team leader. It is up to you. That's your
yeah,
accountability, right? You can't just hope that the team. I see a lot of times where the team leader wants the team to sort it out, right?
yeah.
The team is going to sort this out. And it's like sometimes you can do that if it's really just a question of lack, unclear expectations or ways of working, or and we just need to get clarity on that stuff. And now we're all clear on it. We're all good to go. Sometimes I've seen that work, but if it's really deep and damaged, then
And personal, if it's
yes, and
personal,
personal, I think that's the key thing, right? Is if the trust has been eroded with that individual specifically on the team, it's tough to go. Okay, so Donna's got a question. Tips for leaders who have the superpower to raise healthy conflict, but their leadership team's egos are not open to the discussion. Any tips and tricks on that?
yeah, so that TARP exercise is really great for that scenario because what you've done is you've helped the other leaders on the team understand their own obligation. So what rope they're pulling. And so then you go in with questions that are inviting them to bring the tension. So, I'm really thinking about this opportunity from an operational perspective. And of course, I'm rolling my eyes because it's kind of intensive. But for you, the head of commercial, what's the opportunity here? What do you see here that I'm not considering? Why should I be excited about this why should I be willing to go through this pain in the butt to, you know, what you don't want to do is set it up as adversarial. But if
Mm,
you understand the tarp and all the ropes on the tarp, then you're able to invite people into the conversation to bring their unique perspective in a way that feels just like a conversation and a dialogue. So the reason we do the TARP exercise with every team we work with is it sets us up for every conversation from there on out to be able to kind of say, all right, like as we know, I get this from this lens, and this is kind of how I'm thinking about it, or these are my stakeholders, but I don't understand the field staff and what their life is like. So, I really need one of you to, you know, and if we've done the tarp, then we literally people just use that language. I need you to pull the rope for the field for the field staff. And then you've got a language, or I feel like our whole tarp is kind of off center and somebody's getting wet over here. How do we bring that perspective in? Because then what you're doing is you're asking for them to do a favor and giving them a chance to shine in their roles as opposed to take you on, right? You
Yeah,
don't want them to
like I
take you
think
on.
too, like the other thing I think about, and this is further down the chain, when you're
Yeah,
developing leaders, when you've got leadership development initiatives in your organization, you need to get leaders thinking broad-based about the business. It is much like, because I think, the word silo, right? Like I've been hearing the word silo for 25 years, right? We're so siloed, we're so siloed. I don't think it's changed much in 25 years, but I think partly that's because if we don't develop when we're thinking about leadership development, we're still very focused on individuals.
yeah,
And people get promoted up the line often because of their technical knowledge and competence. Because right now, to make decisions, you need good technical knowledge and competence. But we need to start getting curious. We need to start understanding the interconnectivity between our area and other areas. And I think that's what the TARP exercise really
yeah,
does, is it starts to in a safe way, sort of encourage that curiosity, broaden the depth of understanding and knowledge about the business, and help people move that forward. So yeah, I love that.
yeah.
Um, I think the before we sort of wrap up, I do want to talk about hybrid work really
Oh, yeah.
quickly. I know it's kind of overused, but what's your take on how hybrid and remote work is sort of contributing to a lot of the spin? Like our focus in the
Yeah.
conversation today is how do we reduce spin? What do you think leaders need to be doing differently or more of to kind of create clear alignment decision making when we've got this kind of in the office, not in the office, sometimes
Yeah.
here, sometimes not there?
Yeah. Hybrid is the worst of both worlds if
Mm,
you're talking about a hybrid team,
yeah,
right? So, in the pandemic, when we all of a sudden had to go to all being remote, that was okay
yeah.
because and actually it addressed some of the issues and concerns. We had one team where there was a man who was very physically intimidating. And
Mm,
all of a sudden, his box was the same size as everybody else's. And if he started yelling, you could just turn down your volume. And so there were lots of positive things about it because we were
mm,
all in a uniform kind of thing. It was when we went to hybrid. So some people were physically together and some people were not. That messes with the trust centers of your brains and it
mm,
creates an asymmetrical experience. So if you've got a bunch of people together in a room who can whisper and see body language and all of that, and then people who are kind of handicapped by being remote, um, I also was on a session where the people who were in the room together couldn't see the chat in the meeting, and the people who were remote could. And then they were having the like side conversations that the other people couldn't. So it's the asymmetricalness of hybrid.
mm,
So I would say remove hybridness as much as possible. So if you have to have people on Zoom, put everybody on Zoom. Stay
right.
at your desk, be on Zoom. Then invest to say these are the days when we are all going to be physically together and we're putting all technology away and we're actually going to. So, hybrid is definitely the worst of both worlds. So try and avoid it whenever possible. And have people have a symmetrical experience. And then switch to asynchronous more often. I've done a lot of work on this, so I have more resources on this and a course on hybrid that people can certainly access all the content through the Roundtable. But just that's the general principle.
Yeah,
Hybrid sucks. Try and get things more symmetrical
yeah.
using asynchronous and then invest to have people physically together when that's the right way to
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've been running the Roundtable Hybrid since we started, and I will say that we have command performances though when everybody
right,
has to be in the office for certain things,
exactly,
and that's a non-negotiable.
right, which is
So,
perfect.
you just need to be really intentional about doing those things. And I feel like, a lot of leaders are hesitant to do that. Again, it goes back to being directive. It's okay to set expectations and be clear on what you need.
I think we've sort of lost track of the fact that we're paying people a salary to do a job. And we kind of need to come back to that. So I just want to say I'm not against hybrid work. Like I love work some days at home where I'm a big fan of 3 or 4 days in the office and 1 or 2 days at home for sure. I'm a
Yeah.
fan of that. I'm talking about a hybrid team when
Yeah.
you're trying to collaborate. That's where
Yes.
some physically together, some remote is just
Yeah.
suboptimal.
Yeah, 100%. I can't believe we're at time. So, we could keep talking and talking. Thanks everyone for tuning in, and thanks Liane for being with us today. You will get a recap of the top highlights from today's session. We are recording it, so feel free to share it and send it around. And I'm going to kind of share with you a few things that we are doing with Liane's work around teams, so that if you're interested in learning more, we've got a little micro course that we've put together that are the basics around, some key steps around alignment, looking at alignment and dynamics within teams and what you can do with some tools that you can download. So the QR codes there, we'll also send it out next week. But feel free to sign up for that, and tell your friends if you have folks that are also interested in getting better at team coaching. Share it out with them. We're going to do a draw for the first 10 people who refer friends who sign up for Liane's book, The Good Fight. So watch for that. And then we are big in team coaching these days, let me tell you, and we've got a number of different ways that we do it. And here are some examples of the types of accelerator sessions that you can do that are based around Liane's work and some of our own work. So reach out if you'd like more information on that. And if you're looking for a more programmatic way to develop team coaches within your organization, one of our group programs is very focused on that. It's the High Performance Team Coach Program. Well, we will take your director, VP level leaders, I would say high performing, and have them learn how to coach their teams more effectively. So we work with them, they work with their teams, and we see what impact they have over either a 12-month or 24-month program. So lots of ways we can support you around teamwork at the Roundtable. And again, so thrilled to be working with Liane on all of this. So more to come around that. And I will throw it back over to Leah.
All right, I'm back. Whew, that was a good that was a great conversation. Thanks to both. There were lots of really great takeaways. So if you enjoyed this, we are running another conversation next month in the Talent Talks series, and so it will be all focused on team energy and missed targets and understanding kind of why we go and do the things that we do. So you can see the time and date, May 22nd from 9 to 10:30. So a little bit longer. Just take note because this is going to be working through some case studies and some really interesting data. So that'll be a great working session, all in the Talent Talks series. So look forward to that. But wait, there's more. So we have our open enrollment series, and due to popular demand, we actually had to create 2 cohorts this spring. So our spring cohort of senior managers and directors is full, but there are 2 spaces available at the next level up, which is the senior director AVP VP cohort. This is our leadership development end-to-end experience. You get a lot of bang for the buck, so to speak, with respect to executive coaching, group coaching, 360 assessment, manager alignment, really, and expansion of peer networks. So if it is something that is of interest to you, you can reach out to my colleague Ashley, who will be happy to fill you in with a few more details around that. So we are at the end of our conversation for today, but it is not the end of our conversation forever. We want you to please stay in touch. Lots of ways to reach out. And if you have been, obviously you've been sitting on this webinar, you will get the follow-up, the recap, the recordings, and some great takeaways that Glain mentioned. So thank you all for joining, and look forward to seeing many or seeing your names in the May 22nd session.